Today I have the great pleasure to introduce to you one of my beloved friends and brilliant mind and caring soul, Tess Mateo. She is not only a longtime advisor to the United Nations on gender and climate, but also founder and director of CX Catalyst, and also an impact investor and a successful entrepreneur. Tess, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Welcome to our program.
Thank you, Mariana, for having me. Very excited to do this with you.
You can't be as excited as I am, because ever since I've known you, we met, 2011, I think it was, in Istanbul, of all places, in Turkey, during Global Summit of Women. And we've done amazing things together. And we're just, soul sisters, I would say. So in that, we're totally aligned because we agree on the existential role women and girls play in ensuring the future of life on our planet. And it's just as simple as that. It's existential. And in order to implement the UN SDGs within planetary boundaries, of which there are 9, and 3 or 4 are already out of the planet, the operating system that is safe for the planet, we need women. And we can't do it without women. This is what science tells us. And we know that is true, but now we have all the abundance of the scientific research and economic power that can help us implement that. And Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, said already that women hold half the sky. But when you look at the way women are treated globally, we are disempowered. And in order to make our contribution to implementing the UN SDGs within planetary boundaries, we need economic empowerment of women. And this is actually what you set out to do. You set out to accelerate the transformation and started the very ambitious goal of Equality Moonshot. And you invited me to be part of it. I'm a humble contributor, but tell us, what exactly is that exponential impact of the Equality Moonshot?
Well, actually, it's really interesting. Actually, it was Thomas Piketty's book of, I think it was Future of Capitalism. And there was a lot of data that started coming out of the importance or the highlighting of the inequities that was showing up, because all of a sudden we had the data. Before that book, or before that time, I think it's around 2018, there wasn't enough data to actually that was captured so that you could actually see the impact of policies and the resulting inequities. And one of the things that was highlighted, not in the book, but in subsequent reports, was the fact that less than, I think it was around 11% of the list of the billionaires list were female. And a great portion of those women were actually inherited wealth. And it dawned on me that we had been fighting so much of having 30% of management, 30% on boards, that women need to have that representation to have a voice. But unless we actually own the assets, the world, and control some of the world's resources, we actually won't have that equality or that balance of who owns the property. So the Equality Moonshot is just simply saying that at least 30% of the money that's going to be spent to either achieve the SDGs or right now to recover from the pandemic, so these are the recovery funds, should be going to a representative group of the Earth's citizens, and that includes the women. And so the Equality Moonshot is just simply saying at least 30% of the investments and the wealth created as we move forward from the pandemic or as we pursue these SDGs should go to benefit women. And I think it's interesting that we met in Istanbul. That was also during the meeting of the least developed countries, the first time that was held in that part of the world. And what's super interesting is we both come from, my background's in corporate restructuring work, your background's in technologies, and we came from very male-dominated industries. And we both have been able to power up and find our way to succeed in those industries. And then the revelation and coming together, sitting on a panel, talking at this Global Summit of Women, we just had this aha moment. Wait, we can work together to move forward. And it was wonderful to work with you when we went to the Rio Plus 20 meetings to then start making the commitment of women specifically in these growth industries about the green economy, because we both saw that in order to be sustainable by 2050, we needed to actually move towards a greener economy.
And you basically gave up your extraordinarily successful career as a management consultant to embark on this mission to empower women and also accelerate the green economic growth through women empowerment 10 years ago. So why did you do that? And how, the second part of the question, because you mentioned the Global Summit of Women and also the Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit, what do you see the role of governments play, and how do you see that applying or implementing the Equality Moonshot?
I was fortunate enough that when I was at the Global CEO's office of PricewaterhouseCoopers, 2008, I actually, on behalf of my CEO, worked and co-chaired the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's Vision 2050. And in that groundbreaking work where we had 400 companies contribute from 14 industry sectors across 23 countries, it was the first time we had a collective view of how can we all collaborate to actually address sustainability. And interestingly, there were 40 must-haves by 2020. And so when I don't know if I would say I gave up my consulting or restructuring to pursue something. I was pursuing a market opportunity, because the 40 must-haves by 2020 meant that all 400 companies were committed to pursuing those opportunities. And so I chose to go after women's economic empowerment because I thought I could make an impact there. Clean water, clean energy, sustainable food, and health. And in that realm, it wasn't just the private sector and those companies doing it, it was also the government. So I was fortunate enough to be part of the World Bank's Private Sector Leaders Forum. And in that case, they've created a lot of research, data, and policy recommendations to highlight specifically what it would take to engage more women into these economies. McKinsey did a great study, Parity, was it 2015, that actually specified what all those policy recommendations are. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to be part of the US delegation to the G20, which is going to be in Rome in October, and looking at what is the post-pandemic economy? What should it be? What should it be? How should it be structured going forward? Because clearly what it was before isn't going to work. And that's where I think there's significant opportunity where both the governments and the private sector want to work together as they did in addressing the pandemic to go forward.
So what particular or specific values do women bring to the table that would otherwise not be available? And one thing is, we're clearly moving from a shareholder valued economy to a stakeholder valued economy. Yep. And how do women contribute in terms of to that transition that is obviously badly needed with respect to the values that they bring, which would otherwise not be addressed?
Well, you've always heard the comment about the global financial crisis. If there had been women at the table, it would not have been as high risk. So women are less, are more risk averse, and they actually do things with much longer term timeframes in the way they feel. But I also think what's different that women can do is that the diversity of thought. When there's diversity, there's always greater ideas, greater value driven. But women, there's this huge, we are now entering into the golden age of transparency. Tim Ryan at PricewaterhouseCoopers, who I greatly admire, is really just championing this. He's championing the fact that diversity and inclusion is what's going to set organizations as well as governments apart in the future. It's going to be a competitive edge. So what women bring to the table is that we're the carers, we're the caregivers of both families, communities, and the planet. I mean, sustainability was coined by a woman. It came from, it's a bottom-up movement, and it was Gro Brundtland, when she was gave this report, who gave the first comments that we have to collaborate on the world's resources and manage it accordingly. So I think it's exciting, because when I want to highlight some of the women who are at the forefront of this, you have Emily Kirsch, who created the first incubator on solar, and she's out of, it's called Powerhouse in Oakland, California. Then you also have Jamie Naik, who created the first Women in Green Forum. So finding all of these hubs in which to share ideas. Wandi K, who's, I can't pronounce her last name, but she's the CEO and founder of SPCG in Thailand. She's the largest solar operator in ASEAN countries. She brought solar to Thailand and that's now spreading it across Asia. So there's these wonderful opportunities that before people weren't thinking about, even rent the runway, right? So the whole fact that fashion doesn't have to be disposable, but we should actually think about the circular economy. And so that was a female idea, but women are willing to make these investments for the long term. And as mothers, we shape what our families eat, we shape what our families do, and we share what our families think about.
Right. The next question is, how can we leverage the capital that is out there in order to move it toward your goal of the Equality Moonshot, particularly since, as per research, McKinsey and others, we are currently experiencing the largest handover of inheritance of capital from being inherited from parents to and grandparents to their children than ever in human history. So how do you see that women participate in this transfer of wealth, and why should that happen? The second question is, what is the mind shift that needs to occur in order for that transfer to happen?
So coming out of the pandemic, the most important thing to governments right now is to make sure job creation. We need to really, really have an engine for job creation, because that was the biggest destruction in the past year. And that is going to come from the small, medium businesses, because they employ 60-70% or create 60-70% of all the new jobs. So with the governments now looking at how can we make this more equitable in this growth that's going to be coming, there's going to be, and that's part of what we're looking into the G20 recommendations to the finance ministers. How about public procurement towards these groups like the women entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses? Because so there's that shift that's going to be the spend. You have all of the companies and multinational companies who've committed to source and empower women. You've got UPS, who's created an entire program on female exporters. You have Coca-Cola, who they committed 5 million women by 2020. 5 by 20, they actually hit 6 million. So there's a lot of interest and commitments, because people are now recognizing with the data that they need to put more money into women-owned businesses. And so that capital is slowly happening, but once it becomes kind of coming out of these new big forums that, hey, we now have to make a collaborative commitment, just as there were commitments from governments and companies to come up with a vaccine for COVID. The same thing, I think there is a lot of energy that this could be, leveraging Bob Zoellick when he was the World Bank's president. Investing in women is smart economics. So I think there's a lot more awareness, and I think there's a lot more commitment. I think the UN Global Compact's corporate members, their entire focus this past, 2 weeks ago, was target gender equality. So I think there is a big, much more than ever before, commitment to source from women-owned businesses.
You mentioned that one of the biggest issues that we have right now, we know that is the lack of jobs, and the jobs that have been lost through COVID-19. how does that impact the idea that women should be allowed to come more forward, to should be financially sustained more? How does that relate in this competitive job landscape?
Well, so there were more, at least in several countries, there were more startups or new registrations of new businesses made by women in the past. And a lot of that was just the struggle of being at home with their children or having these so you saw there's great innovation around food waste, and a lot of the women started those businesses about dealing with food waste. How do you, and I think it's because they're at the forefront and seeing all of it within their communities. So when you ask, is there a collective view of what industries women will dominate? It would be under right now, what I've seen a lot of the startups data saying it's within education and within caregiving. It's this whole concept of the care economy. And women have more knowledge about that because we're at the forefront. Now, business formation and scaling, women-owned businesses have not scaled like they have in the past. But I think that's where the corporates are now committing to helping those entrepreneurs scale their businesses. And I think that's what's different, is that now you have corporates finding where within the value chain, as well as the business cycle, they can contribute to support this segment.
Science tells it very clearly that women have one of the biggest roles when it comes to reducing the carbon footprint on the planet. If we want to survive, it's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
It says that educated women with 12 school years would have one child compared to one without that same education that would have on average 4.5 children. How do you think that will, do you think that the programs are in place, and you just mentioned G20 and others, take that into consideration to accelerate the education of women and the role of STEM education in women? What is your feeling with respect to the global activities and governmental initiatives?
So, as you know, in 2015, the Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were set, and governments, all 160 or 93 of them, made a commitment. And within those 163 targets to those commitments include the education of women, of girls. They don't include a STEM component. That's something that the private sector and others, like including us, are promoting, just because that way you have more women moving into the more higher value education. But those commitments, I think the governments are making sure that the girls are getting educated because of exactly what you said. Now, what's also interesting is one of the to reduce carbon emissions, one of the biggest recommendations is also around agriculture. More than 40% of the smallholder farmers are female. And so getting them the training to tend to their crops and teaching them how to farm better and more environment with best practices, that also adds to it. So you have you have several different layers of educating women and girls for the future. You've got them at the smallholder farmer levels. You have them girls, which as they get more educated, then you are dealing with population control and also their ability to contribute to the economies. And then at the very high level is, how do you get women into these high growth, high margin sectors, which is what the STEM pushes, because that's where the opportunities are.
So last question before the last. What are taboo zones that we're currently not discussing and you would like to add onto your wish list when going to the G20?
Oh, I mean, right now, I think my big focus is the procurement side, because I think the procurement will have the biggest lever because it will just trickle down through their supply chains. So as much as there's so many other things that you'd want to introduce, with the Transformation is Feasible report from the Club of Rome and their climate emergency funds, we really have to zero in on what's important for the next 10 years to get to that sustainable path, which is all around renewable energy, the transition to renewable energy, the transition to sustainable food chains, and then the
Inequality.
inequality related to education, health, and gender. So I haven't put other things on my plate other than that, because I think there is going to be a huge, big spend in changing the energy grids, because I think there's a lot of passion, both with the EU's Green Deal, the United States. Biden's very much committed to the climate change, and I think I'm very excited for that.
All the power to you, dear friend. So how can people get in touch with you? So to support you, inform you, help you, give money
Sure.
to you?
No, you don't have to give money to me, but you can email me at tmateo@CX and happy to include your voice or include you in all the efforts that I'm doing globally, and of course they should contact you because we're all working together.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. All the power to you. Good luck to you, my dear friend.
Thank you.